This isn't Southern charm. This is Southern suffering. Below the moss, the dead are still arguing. In Montgomery, history isn't over. It just watches silently from the shadows. If you dare, we count down the top 15 haunted places you should never visit alone. Winner, the Governor's Mansion, Montgomery. The Governor's Mansion in Montgomery, a structure of neoclassical symmetry dating to 1907, maintains a meticulous public facade that belies its true occupancy for decades. Staff and gubernatorial families have documented anomalies defying rational explanation. Internal maintenance logs frequently cite inexplicable temperature drops, cold spots persisting near the grand staircase and the upstairs master suite. Irrespective of the HVAC settings, the history of the structure is heavy, hosting dozens of administrations and personal tragedies. The prevailing mood among those who work the late shifts is one of constant, unnerving scrutiny, described not as simple emptiness, but as palpable observation from unseen vantage points. The most consistent manifestation involves the specter of a woman, believed by many long-term employees to be a former First Lady who tragically expired within the residence shortly after her husband's term concluded. Her presence is often announced by the faint scent of lilac or by distinct, measured footsteps pacing the second-floor hall late at night. One former governor's aide detailed an incident in 1988 where several antique music boxes, secured in a display case, began to play simultaneously, though none were wound or activated. Furthermore, a disturbing pattern involves the appearance of a small, pale child, often glimpsed at the end of the long service corridor, who vanishes the moment direct attention is given. These sightings are recorded across multiple, unrelated administrations, dating back to the 1960s. The reality of the phenomena has become an unwritten covenant among those tasked with maintaining the residence. Every 4 or 8 years, a new family moves in, attempting to dismiss the reports as mere folklore, only to quickly realize that they are not the sole occupants of Alabama's official residence. The governance of the state continues under the silent, perpetual supervision of the deceased. First White House of the Confederacy, Montgomery. The structure at 626 South Perry Street is a repository, not just a museum. For 4 months in 1861, it housed the weight of a fracturing nation. Investigators note the persistent chill in the drawing room. Regardless of external temperature, a historical cold that seems to radiate from the very decisions made within those walls. The air holds an undeniable heaviness, often attributed to Verena Davis's documented misery during their brief, chaotic residency. Curators often mention the faint, pervasive smell of Jefferson Davis's favorite cigar, a phantom odor that concentrates near the library, lingering long after any modern human presence has ceased. The most disturbing phenomena cluster around the nursery on the second floor. Though the Davises' tragic losses occurred elsewhere, the residue of their anticipatory grief seems anchored here. Visitors report the sound of a child's low, persistent humming near the rocking horse, an audio loop that fades when approached, only to resume immediately once attention is diverted. More chillingly, the heavy, antique rocking chair positioned near the window frequently shifts. Security footage has captured the chair initiating a steady, unassisted movement, rocking slowly for several minutes before halting abruptly, an act that implies sustained, unseen presence rather than residual energy. This property serves as a historical anomaly, a brief moment of intense political activity frozen and echoing through time. The disturbances are not playful poltergeists. They are documentary, tied strictly to the psychological and political burden of the Confederacy's nascent government. The house is not haunted by the dead, but by the overwhelming, unresolved anxiety of the living who briefly occupied it. It remains a monument to failure, where the echoes of lost causes manifest as cold spots and spectral sound. 3. The Red Lady of Huntingdon College, Montgomery. Huntingdon College in Montgomery, Alabama, is a campus defined by Gothic Revival architecture and a pervasive, lingering cold. The institution's most persistent spectral claim centers on the Bellingrath Hall dormitory, specifically the third floor, which has been the site of reported phenomena for decades. The spirit, known only as the Red Lady, is consistently tied to a student who attended the college during the Great Depression era. Local lore suggests this young woman, burdened by heartbreak or intense academic pressure, ended her own life while wearing an identifiable crimson gown. This event established the tragic baseline for her subsequent haunting, distinguishing her from other campus legends. The phenomena are not relegated solely to Bellingrath. Reports often surface from Legon Chapel, a space the Red Lady apparently frequents. Witnesses describe feeling an acute, localized temperature drop near the main altar or perceiving a sudden, overwhelming scent of period-appropriate perfume. The most significant documentation involves visual sightings within the chapel's perimeter, where she is sometimes observed as a transparent figure standing motionless near the pipe organ, her signature red garment visible only as a brief, horrifying splash of color against the pale stone. Custodial staff often describe an unsettling sense of surveillance when working alone in the hall late at night. Modern students, often initially skeptical, routinely report evidence supporting the original claims. In Bellingrath, objects shift on the third floor when the rooms are vacant, and isolated weeping is heard during the dead hours between 2 and 4 a.m. The Red Lady is not perceived as malevolent, but rather profoundly melancholic and territorial. Her continued presence remains a persistent feature of the Huntingdon campus, a century-old manifestation of despair, perpetually trapped in the shade of a deep, unworn red. 4. Oakwood Cemetery, Montgomery. Oakwood Cemetery, established in 1817, is not merely a burial ground, but a stratified history of Montgomery. The northernmost sections, shrouded in thick Spanish moss, hold the most profound sorrow, the Confederate mound. Here, in the shadows of the granite obelisk, rest hundreds of unidentified soldiers lost to Shiloh and Chickamauga. Historians frequently note the disproportionate number of young men interred here, many succumbing to fever and exhaustion rather than battle wounds. It is this concentration of suffering that forms the nexus of the persistent. Verifiable claims of paranormal activity, claims often dismissed as simple folklore until witnesses provide corroborating detail regarding the apparition's dress and demeanor, consistent with mid-19th century mourning attire. The most notorious phenomenon involves the weeping woman. Though several historical identities have been proposed, the most frequently cited is Martha Doremus, a young woman who lost her fiancé in the war and, according to local records, spent the remainder of her life haunting the cemetery grounds until her own death. Witnesses consistently describe a figure cloaked in white, or sometimes heavy gray wool, moving soundlessly among the headstones near the older paths. Crucially, the sightings are rarely visual alone. Many people report a sudden, dramatic drop in temperature, followed by the distinct sound of inconsolable, soft crying, sounding exactly as if it is emanating from beneath the earth near the Confederate mass grave. This auditory event often precedes the visual manifestation by several minutes, suggesting a lingering emotional presence rather than a simple visual echo. Investigative teams using period-appropriate thermographic equipment have recorded unexplained cold spots that defy meteorological or geological explanation, centered specifically around the Doremus family plot and the adjacent Soldier Rows. The fear surrounding Oakwood is not derived from aggressive haunting, but from an overwhelming sense of historical, unresolved grief. Those who encounter the weeping woman rarely feel threatened. They feel watched, and they feel the absolute heavy weight of her perpetual sorrow. Her presence serves as a visceral reminder that the dead of the Civil War, specifically those left nameless in the heat of Alabama, have never truly found peace. Fee, Alabama State Capitol Building, Montgomery. The Alabama State Capitol, a neoclassical sentinel atop Goat Hill, rarely settles into true silence. Its profound weight is not merely architectural, it is the physical manifestation of historic political trauma. It was here, in 1861, that the Confederacy was born, the decision etched into the marble of the Senate chamber, a moment of irrevocable national fracture. Night security reports consistently mention a dramatic air pressure shift on the second floor, specifically near the governor's office, feeling like the instantaneous arrival of a large, agitated crowd, though surveillance logs show only empty halls. The residual energy of that secession crisis, those fevered, desperate debates, is said to adhere to the plaster, manifesting not as a specific apparition, but as overwhelming, historical dread that presses down on late-night staff. The most persistent anomaly involves the grand staircase where Jefferson Davis took his oath. Maintenance staff, long accustomed to the building's quirks, routinely log intense cold spots that defy the internal HVAC system, sometimes intense enough to form fleeting visible fog patches near the base. More disturbing are the auditory phenomena documented by investigators. Muffled shouts, rhythmic military footsteps echoing from the upper rotunda when the building is strictly locked down, and the faint, distinct scratching sounds often associated with frantic writing or ledger marking, usually emanating from the old legislative offices where war decisions were finalized. These are not recordings of sound, but perceived acoustic remnants of deep desperation. The consensus among those who spend prolonged hours within the building is that the haunting is not a singular, recognizable entity, but a collective historical echo, the sound of history refusing to be sealed away. Guards tasked with late patrols report seeing shadowy figures that dissolve upon approach, particularly in the dome's dark corners, seemingly manifesting the anxiety of politicians and soldiers caught in the inescapable spiral of war and subsequent defeat. The Capitol remains perpetually heavy, a monument built on a fatal decision, where the consequences of 1861 still breathe the cold air, waiting for the light to fade before recommencing their silent political argument. 6. Montgomery Country Club, Montgomery. The Montgomery Country Club, established in 1898, retains much of its original architecture and, reportedly, its former residents. For decades, the most consistent spectral activity centers on the main clubhouse, particularly the second-floor ballroom and dining areas. Numerous staff members, caterers, and members have reported the apparition of a young woman dressed in pale evening attire. She is typically seen late in the evening, often standing at the top of the grand staircase before quickly fading from view. These sightings are corroborated across multiple decades, lending significant weight to the claim that a permanent presence resides within the facility's historic core. Further documentation involves significant auditory phenomena. Reports often detail the distinct, anachronistic sounds of string music and distant, high-pitched laughter emanating from the unoccupied ballroom late at night, long after events have concluded. Historically, the activity is often attributed to the tragic end of a prominent young socialite in the 1920s who, according to local legend, expired on the property under unclear circumstances just prior to her engagement party. Furthermore, the club's general manager has logged multiple instances of glassware and silver service being inexplicably relocated or thrown across the secured second-floor dining room. When the building was verified empty, this persistent, measurable disturbance has cemented the club's reputation, not merely as a historic landmark, but as a dedicated location of lingering paranormal trauma. The sightings remain concentrated near the original coat check area and the upstairs balcony overlooking the main lawn, spaces historically reserved for society's elite. Management maintains a policy of minimum interaction regarding the entity, but high turnover among evening cleaning crews is an acknowledged operational issue directly correlated with reported encounters. 7. Old Alabama Town, Montgomery. Old Alabama Town is a careful reconstruction, a curated silence of 19th century Montgomery. The structures were relocated from their original sites across the city, but the heavy energy, the suffering tied to their original foundations, seems to have been pulled along. Curators and historical preservation staff often speak of the atmosphere inside the preserved structures, especially after hours, when the scent of wood smoke gives way to something colder. Older, this is not theatrical haunting. It is the mundane residue of lives prematurely ended, authenticated by historical records detailing illness and sudden, unexpected death within many of these homes. The architecture is a stage for preserved trauma, the most documented phenomena center on the doctor's house. Relocated from the city's historic heart, paranormal researchers consistently report significant electronic voice phenomena. Not clear words, but the sound of labored breathing, strained whispers, and the metallic click of instruments being replaced on marble surfaces. Historical accounts confirm the doctor's wife died suddenly of rapid consumption in the second-floor bedroom, a death that paralyzed the household. Staff generally avoid cleaning this room after sunset, claiming the thermal variance around the antique mahogany bed is too severe, a localized, intense cold indicative of clinging, residual trauma, a presence fixed to the physical space of her final, struggling breaths. The unsettling nature of old Alabama Town lies in its sterile completeness. Every porcelain doll, every preserved meal on the kitchen table seems ready for occupants who never arrive. Security patrols consistently report the disquieting feeling of being observed from the dark windows of the structures, and movement in the periphery. One notable incident involved a night guard seeing a slight, indistinct female figure standing in the doorway of the Lucas Tavern, a brief black and white apparition that dissolved instantly when the flashlight beam touched the spot. It is the history, more than the apparitions, that chills. The realization that these quiet, preserved exhibits may still be occupied by the very people they were meant to honor. The Fitzgerald Museum House, Montgomery. The Fitzgerald Museum House in Montgomery, Alabama, stands as a preserved monument to the early life of Zelda Sayer, a structure imbued with the brittle glamour of the Jazz Age. However, beneath the carefully curated artifacts of prosperity lies the oppressive weight of her eventual clinical decline. Zelda, the definitive American flapper, returned here often, seeking solace from the pressures of New York and Paris. Brief respites before the inevitable returns to institutions like Phipps and Shepard Pratt. The documented shift from vibrant literary muse to institutionalized patient is the foundation of the house's lingering dread, a tragedy of genius that failed to survive the scrutiny of F. Scott's literary lens. Curators and maintenance staff consistently report anomalies that defy conventional explanation, treating them less as spectral visits and more as residual atmospheric pressure localized to the second floor. Reports frequently cite the distinct, cloying scent of burning paper or smoke emanating from the upstairs study and bedrooms, despite the structure being entirely smoke-free and routinely inspected. Furthermore, electrical fluctuations are chronic, often centering on the preserved telephone in the parlor, sometimes ringing once before disconnecting. These phenomena are compounded by audio anomalies. Visitors and guides often claim to hear faint, discordant piano notes emanating from the empty living room, sounds characteristic of the frustrated creativity that marked Zelda's final. Confined decades, this is not a classic haunting of a sudden, violent end, but a documented persistence of emotional suffering, a haunting rooted entirely in psychological anguish. The activity is localized around areas of Zelda's artistic production and emotional collapse, suggesting the architecture is trapping the memory of her breakdown. The entity alleged to remain in the Montgomery house is not the glamorous Zelda of the 1920s, but the trapped, Desperate version, the woman confined by her diagnosis and overshadowed by F. Scott's fame. The museum house thus functions as a kind of high-fidelity recording device, perpetually replaying the sounds and scents of genius curdling into documented historical madness. No. Hampton Inn and Suites. Downtown Montgomery. The Hampton Inn and Suites, downtown Montgomery, situated on Commerce Street, occupies ground critical to 19th century American logistics. This block, running toward the Alabama River, was the epicenter of the pre-Civil War cotton trade and the brutal infrastructure that supported it. Historical documents confirm that adjacent warehouses and docking areas served as temporary holding spaces for enslaved individuals awaiting transport or auction, imbuing the foundation of the modern structure with acute historical trauma. This history is not merely academic. It is considered the energetic anchor for repeated paranormal phenomena reported by staff and guests. Reports filed by night auditors consistently document anomalous thermal fluctuations on the lower floors, often concentrated near the service elevators and the loading dock area, which aligns spatially with the original riverfront depots. Witnesses describe the heavy, unmistakable scent of mildew and damp cotton, even during dry periods, preceding intense feelings of dread. More disturbing are the auditory disturbances, distinct, residual echoes of rhythmic dragging and low, nonverbal vocalizations emanating from empty corridors after 2 a.m. Investigations dismiss structural settling or HVAC noise. The sounds are localized and cyclical, inconsistent with mechanical failure. Local parapsychological research connects these occurrences to the residual suffering of the enslaved populations held and traded at this precise location. The activity is interpreted not as an intelligent haunting, but as a traumatic playback, a perpetual fixation of agony on the site of its commission. The sudden, localized cold, the smell of the old trade, and the sound of forced movement remain locked within the foundation, an unending, horrifying reminder of the site's violent economic past. 10. Montgomery Riverfront, Montgomery. The Montgomery Riverfront, the 10th mile marker of the historic antebellum trade routes, functioned as the key port for Alabama's inland cotton market. Historical records confirm that this stretch of the Alabama River, particularly the mud banks beneath the current parkway, was the scene of continuous forced human transport. Enslaved persons, often arriving late at night via overcrowded paddle wheelers, were disembarked directly onto the docks before being marched to nearby slave auction houses. This area was an economic engine powered by profound historical violence, where the liquidity of cotton was synonymous with the liquidation of human lives. The ground here is saturated with this history, manifesting an unexplained atmospheric density that lingers long after sunset. The riverfront's danger extended beyond the brutality of the trade. The river itself was lethal, plagued by constant boiler explosions and unpredictable currents that claimed vessels and crew without warning. Localized folklore surrounding the old docking area often centers on spectral pilots, chief among them the reputed ghost of Captain Jack, said to have perished in a steamboat fire in the 1870s. He is not merely a visual haunting. His presence is often experienced as a sharp drop in temperature near the old foundation pilings and a distinct sound of heavy, waterlogged boots pacing the banks, searching for a manifest that can never be completed. Modern municipal maintenance teams report the most disturbing anomalies. During seasonal deep dredging operations near the retaining wall, hydrophones consistently register faint, rhythmic sounds that defy identification low, distressed moans and high-pitched metal scraping that seem to emanate from the silt. These auditory disturbances spike during the late winter months. Historically the peak season for forced labor shipment, it is a recurring sonic trauma imprinted onto the geography. suggesting the riverfront acts as an acoustic recorder, perpetually playing back the suffering of its foundational era. 11. Union Station Train Depot, Montgomery. The Montgomery Union Station Depot, operational in its current configuration since 1898, remains a locus of severe residual haunting, documented primarily by security personnel and restoration crews of the 1980s and 90s. The grandeur of the Romanesque arches belies a history rife with industrial accident and the constant, dehumanizing flow of traffic across the Deep South. The most frequently observed phenomena involve the phantom sound of a heavyweight steam engine arriving on track 2, often accompanied by a sudden, drastic temperature drop below the baggage platform. This is often followed by the visual manifestation of a former employee, generally identified as a porter wearing faded, period-accurate railway attire, who walks the length of the abandoned platform before dematerializing near the old ticket office. Witnesses describe the manifestation not as ethereal, but as heavy a visual disturbance that occupies space, a momentary anomaly in the thermal map of the structure. A secondary cluster of reports centers around the subterranean utility tunnels and the former segregated waiting room. These areas present persistent acoustic anomalies, specifically the distant, indistinct sound of urgent, hurried conversation, and the metallic scraping characteristic of dragging heavy baggage across concrete. Local historians conjecture these sounds are echoes of an incident in 1947, when a tragic switching error resulted in a derailment and several fatalities. Though precise documentation is sparse, the consistent element in all accounts is the profound, suffocating sense of pressure felt by observers, a feeling of being actively monitored by a presence attempting to complete an eternally delayed task. The horror of Union Station is not the malice of the spirit, but its unending, mechanical routine. The spectral porter is perpetually searching for a manifest or checking a schedule that no longer exists, a relic of labor rendered visible by the sheer force of its unresolved duty. The cold spot on track 2 is predictable, occurring almost every Thursday at 3:17, indicating a rigid trauma loop rather than intelligent communication. The workers here are not tormented by a ghost, but by the relentless residue of the station's own operational violence, a chilling echo that proves some assignments are never truly finished, even after death. 12. Davis Theater for the Performing Arts, Montgomery. The air in the catwalks above the Davis Theater stage is perpetually cold, even on Alabama summer nights. Stagehands accustomed to the strange acoustics of the historic Montgomery building often attribute the sudden temperature drops to ancient HVAC, but veterans know better. They speak in hushed tones about the Lady in White, a spectral presence tied irrevocably to the venue's past as a grand picture palace, the Strand. Before its 1980s restoration, she isn't malevolent, but her silent observation unnerves everyone. Electricians report tools vanishing only to reappear centered precisely beneath the main spotlight, always accompanied by the faint, distinctive scent of vintage Chanel No. In fact, the most disturbing encounters occur during late-night cleanings. Janitors sweeping the balcony seating have glimpsed her elegant, indistinct form gliding across the back row, invariably stopping at seat 12, row F. This specific seat, witnesses claim, is always warmer than the others, suggesting a recent occupation. One former usher, interviewed off the record, recounts finding a single, perfectly preserved white orchid resting on the velvet cushion of seat 12 after a rehearsal. Closed the house at 3 a.m. The flower was impossibly fresh, possessing no dew or moisture, and evaporated completely upon contact with his hand. Theater historians hypothesize the Lady in White is linked to a tragic, forgotten incident, perhaps an actress or patron who expired during a performance in the 1930s or 40s. The ghost light, left burning center stage after every show to prevent accidents, seems to draw her attention. If a stagehand accidentally extinguishes it, the temperature plummets instantly and the unmistakable sound of a woman's deep, sorrowful sigh echoes from the empty orchestra pit, a silent demand for the light to be restored. The management tolerates the haunting, accepting the spectral audience member as an immutable part of the Davis Theater's enduring legacy. Chris's Famous Hot Dogs, Montgomery. Chris's Famous Hot Dogs, established in 1917 by Greek immigrant Chris Katekis, stands as a fixed point against the fluid history of Montgomery, Alabama. Located strategically near the Union Station rail lines, the diner was a critical waypoint for travelers, politicians, and musicians, a true cross-section of the 20th century South. Its documented clientele included Franklin D. Roosevelt, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., and notably Hank Williams, who is alleged to have eaten his last documented meal here before his tragic, unexplained death just hours later in the back seat of his sedan on New Year's Day, 1953. The building's age and its deep connection to transient history provide fertile ground for the localized legends concerning lingering, non-mortal clientele. Reported paranormal phenomena are specific and consistent. Former employees describe distinct, metallic sounds emanating from the service counter area when the restaurant is closed and secured, often resembling the clatter of silverware or the sudden, overwhelming odor of chili sauce, even when none is cooking. More unsettling are the auditory events attributed to the back booths, which witnesses describe as low, indistinct humming or sometimes the muffled sound of a man weeping, occurring most often on nights when the air is still and the distant rail traffic is silent. Security footage has, on multiple occasions, captured the unexplained displacement of objects, ketchup bottles sliding off shelves without vibration, or the faint, momentary silhouette of a figure slumped over a booth, disappearing when approached. These occurrences are not attributed to any single tragedy, but rather the cumulative historical weight of the location. The final stops, the desperate meals, the sudden departures. Chris's Hot Dogs continues to operate today, a century-old beacon where the echoes of hurried travelers and legendary figures remain imprinted on the environment, a perpetual low-grade hum of historical sorrow beneath the scent of grilled onions and mustard. Shunt. Lucas Tavern, Montgomery. Lucas Tavern, established around 1815 along the critical Cincinnati-Zanesville Pike, absorbed the misery and transient desperation of the early Ohio frontier. More than a simple stagecoach stop, it served as an impromptu infirmary during cholera and smallpox outbreaks, its aged timbers echoing the fevered whispers and final, desperate prayers of travelers who never continued their journey. The innkeeper kept meticulous, though often hastily revised. Records concerning fatalities, many were simply interred in unmarked graves near the property line, adding a layer of residual trauma to the land itself. Architectural surveys confirm several blocked-off sections and structural inconsistencies suggesting rapid, unauthorized additions made decades before modern building codes, perhaps to seal off rooms where illness had claimed too many lives. Paranormal investigation is repeatedly focused on the second-floor dining area, specifically regarding the woman in white legend. This entity is believed to be a traveler who died in childbirth, or a serving girl murdered by a disgruntled patron in the 1840s. Contemporary staff reports detail persistent auditory phenomena, phantom footsteps ascending the main staircase when the building is locked, and the distinct, chilling sound of a crying infant coming from the non-existent nursery wing. Cold spots register instantaneously, often localized to one specific original window pane that inexplicably remains frosted over even in midsummer heat, registering temperatures significantly lower than the ambient air around the glass itself. The most convincing evidence remains the documented kinetic activity. A 2019 documentary crew recorded high-definition audio of what sounded distinctly like heavy furniture being dragged across the exposed hardwood of the function room. On review, nothing visible caused the sound, yet deep, fresh gouge marks appeared moments later on the century-old flooring. These marks, resisting all attempts at repair, suggest not a lingering spirit, but a localized replay of a moment of brutal violence trapped within the molecular memory of the structure, manifesting only when conditions or fear are right. 15. Montgomery Museum of Fine Arts. Montgomery. The Montgomery Museum of Fine Arts, set within the contemporary quietude of Blount Cultural Park, maintains an unsettling atmosphere after public hours. While the building itself is relatively modern, its substantial American heritage collection holds centuries of charged history from the Deep South. Energy that curators quietly speculate has permanently affixed itself to the older portraits and decorative arts. Security logs consistently document an unnerving quietude in the permanent collections after midnight, a pervasive sense of being watched that is difficult to logically dismiss, compounded by phenomena that violate standard institutional procedure. The most credible reports often originate near the early 20th century southern landscapes and the delicate case displays of antebellum silver. Employees have repeatedly documented inexplicable drops in localized temperature that violate HVAC stability parameters, sometimes accompanying faint auditory events, such as a distant sigh or the scrape of unseen leather soles on the marble floor. One incident, officially logged in 2012, involved a night guard reporting the distinct scent of pipe tobacco and stale perfume near a supposedly locked-down display case. Though the cases are alarmed and meticulously checked, artifacts occasionally appear subtly shifted, a rotated figurine, a displaced velvet rope, slight movements that are persistent enough to warrant official memoranda in the operations logbook, detailing logistical anomalies. Management officially attributes all recorded disturbances. The cold spots, the phantom sounds, the subtly altered exhibits to air pressure shifts, structural settling, or maintenance error. Yet, the persistent consensus among the veteran staff remains rooted in the paranormal. The institutional silence and the contemporary architecture cannot fully erase the documented reality that some objects within the MMFA possess a powerful, residual memory of their previous lives, manifesting now as quiet, cold witnesses lingering in the gallery space long after the last patron has departed. The spirits of Montgomery certainly keep busy. Whether you're a skeptic or a seeker, these 15 locations prove the city holds secrets best left untouched, or maybe best explored. Which spot truly gave you the shivers? Drop your scariest pick in the comments below. Don't let the scares end here. If you enjoyed this journey into the paranormal, hit that like button and subscribe. We're already preparing our next investigation, and trust us, you won't want to miss where the shadows take us next.